All right. Well, I'm going to talk a little about the first few pages of the first chapter of Dewey's Logic. I'm going to try to show both on the screen and also read from my book, which has notes in it. So we'll see how that works. But Dewey writes that contemporary logical theory is marked by an apparent paradox. There is general agreement as to its proximate subject matter. With respect to this proximate subject matter, no period shows a more confident advance, and we'll find out what proximate subject matter is in a moment. Continuing, its ultimate subject matter, on the other hand, is involved in controversies, which show little sign of abating. All right, so we'll talk about what these two things are, but so he goes on to say what proximate subject matter is. Proximate subject matter is the domain of the relations of propositions to one another, such as affirmation, negation, inclusion, exclusion, particular, general, etc. So these are different kinds of logical relations, right? Affirming, denying, including something, excluding, and a particular subject versus a more general inclusion of multiple subjects. So no one doubts that the relations expressed by such words as is not, if then, only, none but, and, or, some all, belong to the subject matter of logic in a way so distinctive as to mark off a special field. So there's words we use for expressing relations. This is that, this is not that. If this happens, then this happens, and so on, right? So these are the kinds of things we think about when we're talking about logic. They seem to make logic its own special field. So going on to the next paragraph. When, however, it is asked how and why the matters designated by these terms form the subject matter of logic, dissension takes the place of consensus. So there's more disagreement about why these are matters for logic. That they are matters of logic, we seem to agree on, that these relations are part of logic, but why and how do these form the subject matter of logic? This is something that there's disagreement about. So what are these things expressed by these logical relations? Is not, if then, only, and so on. Do they stand for pure forms? Forms that have independent subsistence? Or are the forms in question forms of subject matter? So are they kind of just out there forms that are not related to particular concrete things? Or are they forms of that actually only exist when they are kind of applied to concrete things? If the latter, what is that of which they are forms? So what is the substance of which the forms are forms of? So if the latter, what is that of which they are forms, and what happens when subject matter takes on logical forms? How and why? These are questions of what I called the ultimate subject matter of logic. And about this subject matter, controversy is rife. There's a lot of controversy about this ultimate subject matter of logic. What is the actual nature of relations? Uncertainty about this question does not prevent valuable work in the field of proximate subject matter, in looking at how these more proximate relations work, like something is something else, something is not, A is not B, and so on. We can still make progress in that, even if we don't, he says, maybe, if we don't agree on ultimately why these things are matters for logic. But the more developed this field becomes, the more pressing is the question as to what it is all about. Moreover, it is not true that there is complete agreement in the more limited field. I think he means the more limited field of proximate subject matter. On the contrary, in some important matters, there is conflict even here regarding this proximate subject matter. And there is a possibility, which will be shown in the sequel to be actualized, which we'll talk about later, basically, there's a possibility that the uncertainty and diversity that exists in the limited field is a reflection of the unsettled state of opinion about ultimate subject matter. So the fact that we have disagreements about the ultimate subject matter, about what relations actually are, can have consequences for how we discuss the actual relations themselves. Next paragraph. To illustrate the existing uncertainty about ultimate subject matter, it is only necessary to enumerate some of the diverse conceptions about the nature of logic that now stand over against one another. So he's going to give some different ideas about what logic is. It is said, for example, that logic is the science of necessary laws of thought, and that it is the theory of ordered relations, relations which are wholly independent of thought. Right? So is logic about laws of thought, or is it about ordered relations just out there, which independently of thought? There are at least three views held as to the nature of these latter relations independent of thought. They are held, one, to constitute a realm of pure possibilities as such, where pure means independent of actuality. So relations independent of whether they actually get manifested in concrete things, in actual life, for example. Two, to be ultimate invariant relations forming the order of nature. So they're relations in nature itself, but invariant relations. And three, to constitute the rational structure of the universe. So ordered relations as constituting the rational structure of the universe, which is broader than being manifested in the order of nature and different than just kind of pure relationality or pure possibility independent of actual existence. In the latter status, this latter status where logic is about ordered relations as constitutive of the rational structure of the universe. In this latter status, while independent of human thought, they are said to embody the rational structure of the universe, which is reproduced in part by human reason. So the rational structure of the universe gets reproduced according to this other theory in human reason, at least partly in human reason. There is also the view that logic is concerned with processes of inference by which knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, is attained. So inference, Dewey will talk quite a lot about inference in later parts of the book and how we control inference, which is getting from things that we're relatively certain about to gaining knowledge about things that we are not so certain about. Continuing. Of late, another conception of its subject matter, of logic's subject matter, has appeared upon the scene. Logic is said to be concerned with the formal structure of language as a system of symbols. Right, so logic, a more language-based or linguistic view of logic. And even here, there is division. Upon one view, logic is the theory of transformation of linguistic expressions, the criterion of transformation being identity of syntactical forms. It's a complex idea. We don't need to go into too much here, but how you transform one linguistic utterance into another. According to another view, the symbolic system, which is the subject matter of logic, is a universal algebra of existence. So, yeah, a universal algebra of existence. So another view of logic, that it reflects the nature of existence. Let's continue. I think there's something there maybe about the early Wittgenstein view of language reflecting the universe, and Bertrand Russell, who Bertrand Russell's views, who Dewey has criticized in various venues, and I believe comes in later parts of the Logic. So going on, though, in any case, as regards ultimate subject matter, logic is a branch of philosophic theory, the logic part of philosophy, so that different views of its subject matter are expressions of different ultimate philosophies, while logical conclusions are used in turn to support the underlying philosophies, right? So logic, he's saying, comes out of one's broader philosophy and then is used in turn to support that philosophy. So it's kind of, self-justifying for philosophy. In view of the fact that philosophizing must satisfy logical requirements, there is something in this fact that should at least provoke curiosity. Conceivably, it affects unfavorably the autonomy of logical theory. But we tend to think that logic is autonomous, that it kind of pre-exists other ways of thinking and can be used to kind of support or take apart, analyze those theories, those philosophies. But he's saying that maybe that's not really the case. On the face of the matter, it does not seem fitting that logical theory should be determined by philosophical realism or idealism, rationalism or empiricism, dualism or monism, atomistic or organic metaphysics. Yet even when writers on logic do not express their philosophic prepossessions, analysis discloses a connection. In some cases, conceptions borrowed from one or another philosophic system are openly laid down as foundations of logic and even of mathematics. Right, so we, again, don't tend to think that logic comes out of one's broader philosophical position, but that it kind of undergirds it or kind of stands separate as a way to analyze different philosophical positions. But he's saying this is not necessarily the case, that it might make sense to think of a realistic logic or idealistic logic, rationalist or empiricist logic, a dualist or monist logic. And when you look at the writings that people have done on logic, you can kind of guess what their broader philosophical position is. Talks about their philosophical prepossessions. What are prepossessions? So what are their kind of governing philosophical assumptions? You can get at these by looking at what they say about logic, even though we think, again, that logic is kind of this separate thing out here that can be used to, analyze anything. And it's kind of pure, right? People talk about pure logic. This list of diverse views given above is put down by way of illustration. It is not exhaustive, but it suffices to justify one more endeavor to deal with proximate subject matter in terms of a theory concerning the ultimate subject matter of logic. So bringing together the ultimate subject matter, what is the nature of relations, how do they work, with the proximate subject matter, which is the actual relations that we find embodied in human life and language and inquiry and mathematics and things like that. In the present state of affairs, it is foolish to say that logic must be about this or that. Such assertions are verbal realisms, assuming that a word has such magical power that it can point to and select the subject to which it is applicable. And this is a theme with Dewey, that logic is a social tool, a social instrument, meanings arise out of social practice and so on. And if you say that this must be that, this word must apply to that thing, you're engaging in a kind of verbal magic or verbal realism, which is not really defensible in Dewey's view. Furthermore, any statement that logic is so-and-so can, in the existing state of logical theory, be offered only as a hypothesis and an indication of a position to be developed. So statements of what logic is should be taken to be hypothetical. But whatever, so continuing on, whatever is offered as a hypothesis must, however, satisfy certain conditions. it must be of the nature of a vera causa. I don't know if I'm going to be pronouncing the Latin words correctly and other language words that you occasionally find in Dewey's logic correctly. I don't know, but vera causa must be of the nature of a vera causa. Kind of generally, that's the true cause of something, or an empirically verifiable fact. Dewey calls it in somewhere else. A vera causa, an empirically verifiable fact. So the hypothesis must have something empirically verifiable about it. Being a vera causa does not mean, of course, that it is a true hypothesis, for if it were that, it would be more than a hypothesis, of course. It means that whatever is offered as the ground of a theory must possess the property of verifiable existence in some domain of inquiry, some scientific domain, philosophical domain, whatever, aesthetic domain. So it has to have some verifiable existence. The ground that you're offering for whatever theory you have, whatever supports that theory, must have something that we can point to as verifiable, as real, no matter how hypothetical it is in reference to the field in which it is proposed to apply it. It has no standing, so the ground of your theory has no standing if it is drawn from the void and proffered simply ad hoc. You can't just pull it out of thin air. It has to be based in some kind of real domain, in some kind of existence. It goes on, the second condition, right? So the second condition that a hypothesis about ultimate logical subject matter must satisfy is that it be able to order and account for what has been called the proximate subject matter. So all those relations, if, then, is, not, it must be able to account for those, of course. If it cannot meet the test thus imposed, no amount of theoretical plausibility is of avail. Sorry. So whether or not it makes sense in a theoretical way, it still has to make sense of these proximate logical relations. And if it doesn't, no matter how well, however good it sounds in theory, then, we can dismiss it. It's not something worth considering. In the third place, the hypothesis must be such as to account for the arguments that are advanced in support of other theories. This is a tricky point. Move this down a little bit. So we're in the third place. Again, in the third place, the hypothesis must be such as to account for the arguments that are advanced in support of other theories. This condition corresponds to the capacity of a theory in any field to explain apparent negative cases and exceptions. Your theory has to be able to explain exceptions to it, right? Why does this theory not seem to apply in some cases? You have to be able to, explain why. Unless this condition is fulfilled, conclusions reached in satisfaction of the second condition are subject to the fallacy of affirming an antecedent clause because the consequent is affirmed. In logic, this is sometimes called modus ponens. But the idea, I think generally the idea is that many theories could potentially explain all these proximate logical relations, right? It could explain why, if, then, explain how propositions are related to each other. But many theories could do that. So how do you know which one is best? Well, a theory has to then explain why the other theories seem to explain this, but actually maybe don't. Right? So you have to explain not just the subject matter that you're looking at, but the other theories that seem to account for that same subject matter. Otherwise, how can you make a decision among them? From these preliminary remarks, I turn to a statement of the position regarding logical subject matter that is developed in this work. The theory, in summary form, is that all logical forms, with their characteristic properties, arise within the operation of inquiry and are concerned with control of inquiry, so that it may yield warranted assertions. So all logical forms arise within the operation of inquiry with trying to figure out a problem. And logical forms are concerned with controlling inquiry so that we can get valid assertions out of it, valid propositions that have ongoing validity, that can be useful in solving related problems, other problems. And he says this conception implies that much more than that logical forms are disclosed or come to light when we reflect upon processes of inquiry that are in use. Of course, it means that, right? It means that when we reflect on inquiry, when we think about inquiry, logical forms appear as having been used, maybe, or that we can make sense of inquiry by using logical forms. Of course, that's true, but it also means that the forms originate in operations of inquiry, right? So Dewey is going to propose a very tight relation between logical form and actual behavior in problem solving, in working through inquiry, that the forms come out of that. They're not just something we use to understand that we can use to apply to that and maybe make it better, but they actually come out of that as well. This is one of the rich ideas in this book. So going into page 12 there, he says, to employ a convenient expression, it means that while inquiry into inquiry is the causa cognoscendi of logical forms, primary inquiry is itself causa essendi of the forms which inquiry into inquiry discloses. Now, Dewey calls this a convenient, what does he say? A convenient expression. It's not that convenient using these long Latinate words, causa cognoscendi, causa essendi. But the idea here, so causa, can't even say this consistently, causa cognoscendi is basically the facts by which you know something, by which you know how something is caused, and the causa essendi is like the actual cause or the objective cause, which you know through the causa cognoscendi. And so inquiry into inquiry, thinking about inquiry, thinking what is inquiry, is the facts by which we know logical forms, helps us see logical forms. The actual cause of the logical forms is the primary inquiry, the actual inquiry, scientific inquiry, daily life inquiry, inquiry in any field, in the crafts and the arts and so on. So those are the actual cause of the logical forms, and then how we come to know those logical forms is by thinking about inquiry, reflecting on inquiry. Some difficult ideas there, but important. Right, I think I might stop here. I was planning to go a little bit longer, but this is pretty demanding. So I think I'll stop here for today at the top of page 12, and then I'll continue next time with some of this further introductory stuff where he tries to kind of give you an outline of his basic view. All right, so see you next time.